So there's just a couple of slides here to say who was John Timmer. His real name, Hubertus Timmer. Now this has been bandied around a little bit. Is this guy the right guy? But yes, it definitely is Hubertus Timmer, alias John Timmer. And he was a Dutch citizen who was a merchant, and he traded here out of Chinsura. And Chinsura is somewhere north of Calcutta, along the border with Bangladesh these days. And Chinsura was a Dutch settlement which the British took in 1795, along with Malacca and the Moluccas and the Cape of Good Hope and Sri Lanka, Ceylon, during the French Wars. So Timmer found himself sort of between the two nationalities, and he approached the British for a prisoner of war pension, which a lot of them did and got, and they wouldn't give it to him for some reason. So they told him to go back and talk to his own government. So he went back to his administrator in charge of Chinsura under the British, and they also refused to give him a pension. They told him, you can go to the devil if you like, but you're not going to get a pension from me. So subsequently he was quite shocked about that. Now, we don't quite know what his movements were after that, but Chinsura was returned to the Dutch in 1814. But let's say the British have come in 1795, 1796, time is passing. We know that he married Martina Roselles here in Penang in 1799. Ironically, that would have been in Government House, the house that Light built as his official residence, as that was where all the Protestant cemeteries were held, Protestant services were held during that time, and it was a Protestant service, a Protestant marriage. So Timmer basically probably came to Penang on trading opportunities, looking for work. How he tied up with Martina, we don't know, but we do know that they married and they had the two children, which we showed in the previous one, so I'm just sort of skipping here. So those two children were baptised in December 1800. Now there's some stories that say that they were twins. Other references say when the two girls got married later on, that one was the younger daughter of John Timmer. So we don't really know, but if that was the case, given the very short time period between the marriage and the baptism, either Martina was pregnant when they got married, or they cut a very fine timeline between the two children. So there's still some more interesting tidbits to try and dig for there. Either way, we find that John Timmer then appears in Burma, and he marries again. So basically, there's a record of him definitely being in Burma in 1807 and having a mercantile business, and he's married this Eleonora Blackwell, and when you calculate, I cannot find the marriage. I've searched high and low and everywhere. That marriage was probably held in Burma or Basan, which is on the Magui coast of Thailand now. And if you count back with his children and the age of Eleonora at her death, it looks like they would have married in about 1805. So what's happened between 1799, 1800 and the two children, and then he's disappeared to Burma and got married again. It's a bit of a mystery. It's definitely the same person. We know that Martina died in 1814, and her two daughters with John Timmer were then quite young. They would have been 15 odd, 14 odd. So they were married off as soon as they became 15 or 16 years of old. But meanwhile, he has these other children. Sophia was married in 1822, so even if you said she married when she was 15, you know, you're really back in the early 1800s. So there's a little mystery there. He had these 4 children. Now, the interesting thing about his will, he died in 1820, and the will was in December 1819. It's a really interesting will because he's quite chatty in the whole thing, and then he puts a whole explanatory note at the end of it as to why it's written the way it is. But the interesting thing is that is what he wrote about the 2 children he had with Martina. So he's giving them 50 rupees in his will, and nothing else under any pretense whatsoever, any other pretense whatsoever. It's a very interesting thing. Now you might think, okay, so he's very poor and all that sort of thing. He wasn't. He left his other children 6,000 rupees each. He also had a house in Chinsara, and he had another house in Salkia in Calcutta, which his wife sold later on, the second wife. And Eleonora died in 1824, only 35 years old. So there again, we count it back with the children, and we come to this around about 1805 date. So there's certainly some interesting research still to be found about how he managed to get remarried. But it also tells us that Martina must have been left here with the 2 young children. And died in 1814 with the children still only 15 years old or so. So it's just an interesting little snippet to put some words to John Timmer, and there's a lot more in the will. It's a very interesting document. So if anybody's sort of interested in delving more into John Timmer, there we go. So with that, I'll just throw the floor open to questions, and hopefully you've got plenty.
Any questions from the floor? Yes?
Oh, sorry. Going back to Francis Lyde, wasn't one of the reasons he was successful, he had a great sponsor in Lord Minto. Lord Minto, the Governor General.
You may be confusing him with Raffles.
Ah, possibly.
Yes.
Possibly.
Questions, you must have questions. We've got lots of questions, you must have lots of questions. Michael, I'm sure you've got a question.
Marcus, either yourself or Datawira, you know there are the Bugis royal graves on the edge of Penang and Kedah
in Echo Kuching. I think there's one prince there, and they list the other 3 princes, some of whom were working for the Sultan of Kedah. Are these the same people involved in Light's story?
I couldn't tell you if they're the same people. I mean, you're talking about the Bugis that came up annoying the Sultan in 1771, are you?
Yes, and there were minor battles along the river, and one of them is buried in Echo Kuching on the Kedah side, and there's a whole screed there in Malay, which I don't read.
Me either. I'm sorry. No, I mean, but we have to remember that, I mean, the Bugis actually came because the Sultan's relations were trying to get rid of the Sultan.
Yeah, and the Bugis...
And they were inviting him, but the Bugis in general were quite friendly to Kedah. I mean, it was the Bugis they called on to try and get the British out of Penang in 1791. Right? And it's a long history of Bugis being involved, but as far as battles and when those princes were killed, I couldn't tell you, I'm sorry, but maybe Dr. Wira has some information.
That is another story about the Ekor Kuching. The only piece of land that Francis Light given to Kedah State is the strip of graveyard. The strip belongs to Kedah, whereas the whole land belongs to Penang. We don't understand why they never want to take that small piece of land. If you go now, you walk along the Penang State, and you'll meet the land belongs to Kedah is only a grave. You ask me, there is no value. It's just a grave, but it still belongs to Kedah. See, but you know about Kedah. In Kedah now, we are trying to do more and more research because there are lots and lots of things that has been not lifted up. Lately, we just found out that there was a ship about 40 to 50 feet underneath that had got to be resurfaced. Because it was just left like that. It seems that Kedah, we started mining in the 50s, 050. That was why our Kedah started mining. We sell all the mine ore either to Arabic countries or to China. And I've yet to find out this is the sword that belonged to Rasulullah Nabi Muhammad. They all came from Bujang, from Merbau. I got to find out. I got to go to China and get the script. They said it's in China.